Isn't it interesting the brands we put on people? He says, but I changed my life to reach those people, whoever. Say that word with me. Whoever. I didn't take on their way of life. I kept my bearings in Christ. But I entered their world and tried to what? Experience things from their point of view. Now the whole debate thing was changed a week ago on Saturday night when Pastor Rick Warren in a church very much like Hope Church decided that he was going to host our political candidates and was going to ask them questions in a very civil and non-derogatory and non-depreciating way as human beings, and they were going to answer them individually and separately, and everything changed, and people walked away and said, wow, that's the way we want to hear it, that's the way we like it, it's just straightforward, it's what we want, and what's interesting about that is it's exactly what Paul said. He said, don't put people down because they're this or that or the other, or they say this or that about themselves, or they act this way or not. He says instead, see things from their point of view without compromising the way you run the race in Christ, and do whatever you can to reach them by passing them the baton. By passing them the baton. Look what else he says. Finish reading it with me. He said, I've become just about every sort of servant there is in my attempts to lead those I meet into a God-saved life. I did all this because of the message. I didn't just want to talk about it. I wanted to what? Say those words at the end again. I wanted to be what? Now listen, gang, it's one thing to talk about the Olympics. It's one thing to talk about what we see on TV. But when you get in the pool and try to swim with Michael Phelps, or run with Bolt, the fastest man on earth now, Paul says, I want you to get in on it. I want you to realize that in this race, everybody has a responsibility. And the responsibility is to pass the baton. To pass the baton. Well, that sounds interesting, but how do we do that? We do that by what we say. What we say. And we do that by how we say it, and we do that by how we live it. What do we say? We say that Jesus Christ is reaching to us in His grace and His mercy and His love. And what's interesting is that there are people here this morning that I talked to before we got into this room, and they came with all kinds of situations in their lives. Parents who are getting older and need constant care. Brothers who are mentally handicapped, and they have to care for them as well. Children who are struggling and hurting. And people in our own city who have lost teenagers this week to gunshots, who buried their kids yesterday. Who is going to pass the baton to them? Who is going to reach to people all around us? People who live next door who have found out they have cancer. Or people who are there that their marriage is in deep, deep trouble. And maybe that's you today. Or some who have lost their children because of drugs and alcohol, and death claimed them way too early. You see, what Paul says is we reach out to all people. We reach out to them because a life-giving church is filled with life-giving missions. And we become life-giving missionaries. So it's not just running to win as missionaries. It's actually passing the baton. And the passing of the baton is when we reach to those people in every way we can. And the way we do that is really, really important. It's interesting because the Bible clearly talks about the way we do that. There's a couple verses that say some interesting things about the way we do that. Listen to this one. How we say it. When we say Jesus is not angry at you, and Jesus is wanting to give you his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness. But the way we say that is really important. Here's what it says in Colossians 4, verses 5 and 6. Be wise in the way you act toward those who are not following Christ. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Yeah, but what about those people who criticize us? What about those people who say things that are derogatory and against us and reject what we're saying about Jesus Christ? Well, the Bible is very clear about that as well. It says in 1 Peter chapter 4, it says exactly how we're supposed to address those people. Here's what it says. It says that we are to always be prepared to give an answer. In verse 15 it says, we give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope. Why are we Hope Church? We have to give the reason why we have this hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Say those two words. Gentleness and respect. That's what Paul and now Peter reemphasizes it. Keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. Well, you say that's easier said than done. And then how we live. You know what's interesting? What's interesting about this is that the next chapter after 1 Corinthians 9, 1 Corinthians 10, is all about how in the Old Testament they did not pass the baton very well. As a matter of fact, the whole chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians is about how the people of the Hebrew people who were in the Old Testament didn't pass the baton well at all. They dropped the baton by the way they lived. They dropped the baton by their wrong behavior. They dropped the baton by the way they responded. And what you have to understand is when we use this term missionaries and missions, that was the whole plan of God even in the Old Testament. You remember when they left Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea and the Red Sea opened up? Why do you think that happened? Why do you think the Red Sea opened so that God could bring them across on dry ground? Well, I know why. So that the Egyptian army could get in the middle of that and drown. No, that is not why. What God was wanting was for the Egyptian army to see the great power of God and to declare Yahweh as their God before anybody drowned. You see, God wasn't interested in judgment. God was interested in them seeing his power and his grace and protection so that they too would follow him.